Hello, everyone, and today I'd like to talk about a very interesting topic, and it's about breathing less. And in humans, overbreathing is just like overeating. For example, the BMI in the U.S. today is averaged at 29, and which is a 38% jump in the past 50 years, right? Where the BMO was around between 12 between 20 and 22. And so similarly, we breathe twice more than it was before, at around 20 beats per minute at 0.5 liters a breath. So that's a lot of breathing, right? We're literally at the higher end of the 12 to 20, right? Which is considered, I think, even normal nowadays, but that's overbreathing. And 25% of people are chronic overbreathers. Yet we knew since ancient times, right, from Japan, from Buddhism, and from Tibet, of the benefits of breathing less. And the author talks about how he went jogging with the other participant, Olsson, at the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, and how he reduced his breathing rate significantly. And they're also extending their exhalation to maintain the CO2 levels, as well as increase their endurance and VO2 max. And the reason is they try to improve their CO2 tolerance and release oxygen better to the tissues. And Buteyko, at his teen years, Buteyko is the guy who invented this method, which I will talk about later. At his teen years, was a World War II mechanic, and he began his research during wartime. After the war, post-war, and then he went to medical school, where he graduated in 1952 from the first Moscow medical school, which is the most prestigious one at that time in the Soviet Union. And he himself had very high blood pressure, like hypertension, and was told by the doctor that he had only 1 year to live at the age of 29, and he suffered headaches and very high blood pressure. In fact, his blood pressure one day was above 200. It was so high, and so he told at the age of 29 that he literally had 1 year more to live. And he was like, he tried to do everything to circumvent it, to prevent that from happening. And in the late 1950s, he went to Academ Garadok, it was called, because he was born in Kiev in Ukraine. So he went to this academic city in the 1950s, and he analyzed many patients who were overbreathing, and he noticed that breathing less is what keeps us healthy and fit. And he gathered many research and assistance into his lab of functional diagnostics later on. So this is after he graduated, and he noticed an inverse relationship between CO2 and heart rate. And he developed a protocol. I forget the name of it, and of course we know it now very well. And it's to reduce breathing and to less than 6 liters per minute, so that you can reduce things like headaches, high blood pressure, and even improve your performance. This effect actually also warms up your extremities. So breathing less also has a hyperthermic, or it warms up your hands and feet, right? Your fingers, hands, and your feet, your extremities. And his method was initially criticized, but it was then recognized effective in 1980s by the Soviet Union Ministry of Health, so by the government, and 200,000 people were learning his technique, right, in the 1980s. Already 200,000 people, which is a considerable amount. And his technique helped these asthma patients. So he was working in asthma wards, right, and in the hospital after he graduated, and then he went to this city to do all of this research. And in his lab, he had everybody, people who were healthy, unhealthy, pretty much everybody. And his technique, and he was helping a lot of people with asthma. And so he helped the people much better than drugs would ever help, because drugs have a lot of side effects, which the author writes in the book, and it can make asthma symptoms worse. And in fact, it can give you even what he mentions in the book, macular degeneration and blindness. Some of the side effects of these asthma drugs are pretty considerable. Now, at that time, right, people were actually not through Buteyko, but just trying to undergo these techniques and do a lot of breath holds. And Emil Zatopek actually used these techniques where he restricted his breath, and it did kind of an extreme version of Buteyko, right, where he ran as fast as he could hold his breath for, right? So, and the guy won 18 world records, 4 Olympic golds, and a silver over his career. So it's pretty successful. Another example is a U.S. swim coach, a United States swim coach, James Councilman, had similar success, and he literally trained athletes for the Montreal Olympics, and the athletes won a lot of gold medals and world records, and they were very, very successful. In 2000, in Paris, Wuron showed that breathing less actually allowed athletes runners to tolerate more lactic acid to improve performance, as well as increase in red blood cells, cardiovascular efficiency, and how it stimulated high altitude training. So it showed that breathing less actually simulates high altitude training, improves cardiovascular efficiency, and even via erythropoietin, which you guys probably heard of before, stimulates a rise in red blood cells. So it allows more red blood cells and better oxygenation of tissue. And he notes that previously people were trying this, were doing these experiments too, but they couldn't show it conclusively, because what they were doing is the people that were doing the experiment had their lungs full of oxygen, but he made sure that they had their lungs half full of oxygen to get better conclusions from the experiments that he was doing. So in 2000 in Paris, that's where it was more conclusively shown that yes, you really get this rise in red blood cells, and you simulate high altitude training when you literally breathe less, or when you restrict your breathing. And the author actually writes that this vasodilation effect, where the vessels engorge with blood, actually send a signal to the nervous system, so you get this dull headache, but it's the good headache. It means that the vessels are engorging with blood and to send that oxygen to where it needs to go. And there's modern evidence too towards breathing less, even more modern than that. In fact, in 2014, a study of 120 asthma sufferers by Dr. Alicia Muret at Dallas showed that after 1 month of raising CO2 levels to around 5.5% after breathing less, the people had less asthma attacks, wider airways, and better lung function. An Australian function in Brisbane showed that the reduction of air intake by a third caused a decrease of breathlessness by 70% and a 90%, almost 100% reduction in reliever medication. And later, Ira Pachman hypothesized that the reason why you get these beneficial effects, it's actually due to a deficiency. As overbreathing, when you exhale all the CO2, what it does is it causes a release of bicarbonate from the blood, and that takes minerals away from your body. It strips away, because when you release bicarbonate, the minerals are going to go with it and are going to be excreted. So you're going to lose a lot of minerals, and they hypothesize that loss of minerals, nutrients, and vitamins and whatever with it, so you get this muscle and nerve dysfunction, and you can even weaken bones. That can also lead to osteoporosis. So he had this deficiency, Pachman had this deficiency type of model. But here's what's really interesting. Regardless how this occurs, we know that breathing less does help a lot with asthma, based on the Buteyko's work, and even right now he helped so much people. There's so much records. We know that it reduces breathlessness, stimulates high altitude training, improves oxygenation, increases your red blood cell count number, and helped so much athletes in the past, helped panic survivors reduce their anxiety. Help people who have panic attacks, help 9/11 survivors, help so many people. And it is interesting because mammals with the lowest heart rate live the longest. And these are the ones that breathe the less. and Buteyko, ancient traditions like Japanese, Buddhism, right? All of those people, 9/11 survivors, as I just mentioned, we're all aware of this, that at the 5.5 breath mark, inhale 5.5, exhale 5.5 for 5.5 breaths a minute, or doing it like in the 5 to 6 range, that's what leads to peak performance and has the best effects. And as the yogi Iyengar puts it, the yogi's life is not determined by the number of his days, but by the number of his breaths.